Welcome back. Namibia's ongoing literacy and numeracy challenges among early grade learners have raised concerns nationwide, with recent data showing a worrying decline in foundational learning. While the academic aspect often takes center stage, the emotional and psychological effects on learners are just as important and often overlooked. Understanding how poor academic performance can impact a child's mental well-being is essential for a more holistic approach to education. Joining us in this third hour is Tuzembeho, who is a respected psychological counselor who offers experts insight into, that is, the mental well-being and emotional dynamics behind numbers. Good morning, ma'am, and thank you so much for making time to speak to us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Now, from a psychological perspective, in terms of the recent data, especially on the grade 3, numeracy and literacy reveal about the overall learning environment and emotional well-being of young learners. What should we take away? I mean, the minister said they were disappointing. What else is there to it?
Well, it is definitely very concerning that 7 out of 10 of our pupils aged 10 up to 10 are unable to read or do basic mathematics. But I think a lot of the time people then focus on it solely from the academic perspective. However, this is very concerning on a larger scale. It is also a crisis for the students' mental well-being, and it's also indicative that we're failing to provide the resources, the necessary support, and the learning methods that might be necessary to assist these children, because we overlook that this can cause to bigger issues for the students in question. They might start feeling like they're not intelligent enough, and therefore also experience a lot of stress and frustration when dealing with their academics.
Do this literacy and numeracy difficulties in early education impact the child's self-esteem, confidence, and long-term motivation to learn?
It definitely does, especially if we consider the fact that for those formative years, a big pillar of having self-esteem and confidence comes from your academic performance. For 12 years or 11 now with the new system, you're in school, and therefore a big way for you to feel confident and feel capable is based on how you perform academically. So if a child is struggling continuously, that will lead to them feeling lesser than their counterparts. It can also cause them to feel less capable and develop a lower sense of self-esteem and confidence, which later on in life can also affect how they deal with other areas of life, like relationships and their career choices, where they'll avoid taking challenges on because they want to avoid that continuous feeling of failure that they've already experienced.
Okay. Now, it's one thing to obviously teachers who are in the classroom and those that are involved in the educational process, school, but are there ways that parents and communities can foster an emotionally safe environment that encourages early literacy development at home especially, and in the broader community?
Most definitely. So for one, that whole method, I'm sure many of us can relate to when your parents help you with their homework and it's like, what is 1 + 1? And you're like, and they just say louder, what is 1 + 1, and they add it with more aggression. That furthers that feeling of frustration and learning becoming stressful. So in order to make it more fun, doable, and also normalize it at home, I would suggest for it to become something normal and entertaining, we can lean into storytelling. In our household, storytelling was always a way of entertainment, but it also learned us how to learn, but it also enabled us to learn a lot. For instance, I learned English through television shows. My home language is Afrikaans. It's all we spoke. So even now my grandma, who raised me a lot, she mostly speaks Afrikaans with a heavy accent still when she tries English. But I was fluent by grade 1 from just taking in educational shows. In leaning into your child's interest, if your kid only sees academics as a bore, for instance, my little brother loves manhwas and mangas. That's the way we entertain him, and also in that way he learns, but while doing something that he finds fun.
He finds fun.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the role of teachers. What can teachers do to incorporate especially the aspect of emotional intelligence and trauma-informed practices in the classroom to perhaps better support learners and with diverse educational and psychological needs? How important is diversity in class? How is it important to have instruments to ensuring that trauma-informed practices exist within the classroom?
Well, we have to be gracious with teachers because they're doing the most under very difficult circumstances. So I also just want to point that out. But helping teachers learn to emotionally regulate during such trying times, because students are not easy to deal with. They can be a lot, especially with how overcrowded our classrooms are. But it is important to prioritize a sense of calmness and peace in a classroom. A lot of children shut down in classrooms when it feels distressing, when they feel disgruntled and everything feels like angst-inducing. So it being a calmer environment is of utmost importance, and for teachers to learn ways to also reward and acknowledge when there's small improvements. If your students, let's say, perform at 30%, increase to 40%, it might not be an A, but acknowledge it so that they feel that there is a reward and their efforts are being seen. So that is definitely a way teachers could attempt to do more. So even if the child isn't necessarily the most academically gifted, they still get their flowers for when they're putting their best foot forward.
Putting their best foot forward. Now, from your experience and the encounters that you perhaps had with learners and during your years of practice, are there any school-based psychological support systems currently being used to address especially the emotional effects of low literacy and numeracy outcomes? And if you have come across such practices, how effective are they? And if so, are there room for improvement? What can we do better?
Well, there is always room for improvement. There are some practices and such in place. I worked at a school as a counsellor last year, and there are many other counsellors, but it's not at most schools. It is limited. The policies and attempts to accommodate mental health are there, but they can be improved upon. And I think it would be improved upon more if there was an understanding of the importance of mental well-being and emotional well-being and how it ties in with academic performances. Teachers can also be trained more in psychoeducation, in child psychology, so that they have the tools to also identify, okay, this child might be struggling with this, so they can screen and identify a child that might, for instance, have ADHD or have a certain learning difficulty. But in that case, teachers also need the additional support from government or from parents and such, because if they're in an overcrowded classroom, we can't expect to expand them beyond their reach.
Okay. Does this mean then perhaps that we need to ensure that, educational policies are addressed in a way that, it addresses both not only the academic but also emotional development of learners who are struggling with basic literacy skills?
Most definitely, and those things need to be tended to and not like swept to the side, because it will still carry on. If you just promote a child from grade 1 to 2, even though they're not meeting those requirements, it will become like a snowball effect of continuous stress, not just for the people that have to educate this child and later has to fill these gaps, but for the child as well.
Especially for parents that might be watching perhaps right now, are there early signs that parents and teachers should be on the lookout for, especially when indicate learners might be struggling, emotionally due to academic challenges? What are one of the things to point out?
Well, there are a few. For one, if your child is happy during the weekend, but suddenly sick and has headaches and migraines and stomach aches when Monday comes around, that might indicate that they find school stressful. As well as in many cases, there is almost a comorbidity with students that are problem kids or naughty in class, being children that also struggle. So their acting out isn't necessarily just because they're problem children, but could also be from their frustration with struggling academically. If the child is more dejected than they usually are, you see they're more sad, they don't enjoy the things they used to, that is something parents can also keep an eye out for, or more direct indications, like if they say things like, I'm stupid, I won't be able to do that, that can also point out to frustrations and feelings of low self-worth when it comes to academics.
Well, Tina Tuzembeho, thank you so much for making time to speak to us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. Now, that was Tina Tuzembeho, who is a psychological counselor, talking to us about confronting Namibia's ongoing literacy and numeracy crisis that we currently face in this nation. We all have a collective responsibility to ensure that we create a conducive environment for children, parents, community, as well as government, and everybody basically must ensure that we create an environment where we want kids are able to ensure that they learn in a conducive environment so that they can be able to thrive. Stay tuned. When we get to return, we continue with more conversations right here on Good Morning Namibia.